Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here. Hope you're happy, healthy and well. It is time for a new book review today where I share the life lessons I learned from reading books. So the book I'd like to talk about today is Australian author Charlotte Wood's new book called the Stone Yard Devotional. As you can see, it is a book that is not from the library. I actually bought this one. I don't often buy books, but simply because I love Charlotte Wood's writing, I thought I'll buy this one. It's also a signed copy as well. You might be thinking and know of Charlotte Wood of her great book called The Weekend, which was brilliant. If you're thinking that her recent book, this one, is like The Weekend, it is written very differently, two very different topics with very different themes. But I really enjoyed this one. It was like reading a devotional, in fact. It was about a woman who I would say is a woman around my age. She might have been in her 50s or 60s. She decides to leave her marriage. And we don't know the reason why. There's a lot of things we don't know the reason why. But we get to understand that she's tired of this world. She's tired of trying to make sense of it. Everything around her, all the situations around her are getting too much. So she decides to go and visit an abbey and lead a monastic life with the nuns there because she needs an escape. She needs to purge all the things out of her life that doesn't make sense anymore. She wants to make it simple again. She wants to just look after herself and clear the clutter of her head. Now, who here does not want that? So 4 years later, she's still there. But in that time, she has 3 different visitations, things that happen to her or to the nuns in the abbey that start to make her think and reflect about her life of the past, about her mother, about her father, about the fact that she has this realization that she has a lot of shame and grief over her mother's passing. Her mother seemed like a fantastic woman, someone who had hope, someone who helped those around her who weren't as lucky as she was, someone who was more like a pillar of the community, but someone who at the time also didn't have the tools and the resources that women of my age have now, and who are probably also trying to make sense of it. At the time, the young woman, her daughter, the protagonist in this book, didn't understand what her mother was going through, but at the abbey with the nuns, at the time and the age that she was now, she started to reflect back of her life, and then she has this realization that people around her are hurting. Everyone is holding some kind of hurt and they're playing out that hurt in different ways. While she's at the abbey, she has the 3 visitations, as I mentioned. The first one is a mouse plague, and this was a fair dinkum thing that had happened in 2022 in the Monaro Plains, which is where this is situated. It's just outside of Canberra. After COVID, Australia experienced in this part of the world this horrible mouse plague. Reading about it and how the mice would get into everything, all the food, in the carpets, in between walls, in the beds, on the fly screens. It was actually quite horrific reading. But these visitations would make her think and reflect about her life. The second visitation was one from an activist nun. And this activist nun was actually someone who the protagonist knew as a girl. And when she was a girl, this nun had a very mentally unstable mother who left her at home for days on end, and who the protagonist had bullied as well. So she starts to think of the bullying that happened at school to this young girl who, out of no fault of her own, had a mother who was unable to care for her. And so these things keep coming back to her. And the third visitation was the bones of a sister who was murdered by a Catholic priest and had been returned by this activist nun to the nunnery, to this abbey, so the bones could be finally laid to rest and the sister can finally be laid to peace at the abbey. These visitations brought up different aspects of the protagonist's life when she was a young girl, and all the inadequacies, all the unfairness, all the waste, all the harassment, all the things in life, in her life, that somehow didn't make sense or somehow hurt other people, it gets all brought up. And so one of the life lessons I got out of this book was, given that the protagonist was around the same age as I was, a lot of the things that she was talking about in here, about the unfairness of male harassment for one, or the unfairness of different ways males and females were treated, or how women were persecuted, how women were abused, and how women themselves somehow also were part and played a part in this. I think what the protagonist was trying to do was thinking back to all the aspects of her life growing up that seemed unfair. And there were times when I was reading this book, I thought to myself, I've thought that of my past. I've thought back to all those teachers who screamed at us and that we made fun of them without really realizing, those teachers themselves were holding some kind of hurt. Or the times where there were certain rules for boys and other rules for girls, but we didn't question it because at the time it was normal. Or times where I would think back to aspects of my life, or what my mum would say, or what my mum would be going through, thinking that she didn't have the choices and also the opportunities that I have today. And so there was a lot of information in this book where I started to think to myself, I am going through very similar things that this person has, but what I haven't done here is actually escaped in the world. I have done my own form of escape by stopping social media, by removing, toxic people in my life, of unsubscribing to anything and every newsletter that I don't have to be a part of unsubscribing to subscription channels, of not using Uber, of not using Amazon. I myself have been doing some aspects of unsubscribing and removing myself from this world just to have a bit of peace. I haven't gone into a nunnery like this lady has, but we've all done some kind of purging from our life in order for us to feel some peace. So I think this book spoke to me in some way, simply because I feel as if it is a book that women of their 50s and 60s should read and would totally understand and totally resonate with. For younger people, I'm not so sure. I think you have to have some lived life experience in order to understand the intent that is behind what is happening here in the protagonist's journey. I think this is a great book. I would recommend it for a book club book, especially if your book club have women in their 50s and 60s. I think that they would all have some kind of connection to this. Let me know what you think if you have read this book or any of Charlotte Wood's book. I would highly recommend the Stone Yard Devotional. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Bye for now.